Alright, fam. We're gonna. Oh, you're kind of far away. I should move you closer. Oof. There we go. Woohoo. I was about to go on and do the puzzle again, but no. We are out of the puzzle now. Alright, we did an impatient war. Okay. Cool. We're gonna do one chapter. We might do two, but it's most likely that we'll just do one. So, our next chapter is called These New Friends of Chemotherapy. And we have two quotes. The death of a man is like the fall of a mighty nation that had valiant armies, captains, and prophets, and wealthy ports and ships all over the seas, but now it will not relieve any besieged city. It will not enter into an alliance. And that is by Czesław Miłosz. I am sorry. But I assume he's Polish. I can't assume anything about that, honestly. Sorry. Or somewhere around, at least Eastern European. I probably have offended some part of my audience by saying that. But yes, and that was from The Fall. And here is another quote. I had recently begun to notice that events outside science, such as Mary Lasker's cocktail parties or Sidney Farber's Jimmy Fund, had something to do with the setting of science policy. And that is from Robert Morrison. Alright, let me just put this obvious piece where it should have been. Yeah, there we go. In 1951, as Farber and Lasker were communicating with telepathic intensity about a campaign against cancer, a seminal event drastically altered the tone and urgency of their efforts. Albert Lasker was diagnosed with colon cancer. Surgeons in New York heroically tried to remove the tumor, but the lymph nodes around the intestines were widely involved, and there was little that could be done surgically. By February 1952, Albert was confined to the hospital, numb with the shock of diagnosis and awaiting death. The sardonic twist in the event could not have escaped the Laskerites. In their advertisements in the late 1940s to raise awareness of cancer, the Laskerites had often pointed out that 1 in 4 Americans would succumb to cancer. Albert was now the 1 in 4, struck by the very disease that he had once sought to conquer. It seems a little unfair, one of his close friends from Chicago wrote with vast understatement, for someone who has done as much as you have to forward the work in this field, to have to suffer personally. In their voluminous collections of papers, in nearly 800 boxes filled with memoirs, letters, notes, and interviews, Mary Lasker left few signs of a response to this terrifying tragedy. Although obsessed with illness, she was peculiarly silent about its corporality, about the vulgarity of dying. There are occasional glimpses of interiority and grief. Her visits to the Harkness Pavilion in New York to watch Albert deteriorate into a coma, or letters to various oncologists, including Farber, inquiring about yet another last-ditch drug. In the months before Albert's death, these letters acquired a manic, insistent tone. He had seeded metastasis into the liver, and she had searched discreetly but insistently for any possible therapy, however far-fetched, that might stay his illness. But for the vast part, there was silence, impenetrable, dense, and impossibly lonely. Mary Lasker chose to descend into melancholy alone. Albert Lasker died at 8 o'clock in the morning of May 30th, 1952. A small private funeral was held in the Lasker residence in New York. In his obituary, the Times noted, he was more than a philanthropist, for he gave not only of his substance, but of his experience, ability, and strength. I found something that had to be done. Mary Lasker gradually forged her way back to private life after her husband's death. She returned to her routine of fundraisers, balls, and benefits. Her social calendar filled up: dances for various medical foundations, a farewell party for Harry Truman, a fundraiser for arthritis. She seemed self-composed, fiery, and energetic, blazing meteorically into the rarefied atmosphere of New York. But the person who charged her way back into New York society in 1953 was fundamentally different from the woman who had left it a year before. Something had broken and annealed within her. In the shadow of Albert's death, Mary Lasker's cancer campaign took on a more urgent and insistent tone. She no longer saw a strategy to publicize the crusade against cancer. She saw a strategy to run it. "We are at war with an insidious, relentless foe," as our friend Senator Lister Hill would later put it, and a war of this magnitude demanded a relentless, total, unflinching commitment. Expediency must not merely inspire science, it must invade science. To fight cancer, the Laskerites wanted a radically restructured cancer agency, an NCI rebuilt from the ground up, stripped of its bureaucratic excesses, intensely funded, closely supervised, a goal-driven institute that would decisively move towards finding a cancer cure. The national effort against cancer, Mary Lasker believed, had become ad hoc, diffuse, and abstract. To rejuvenate it, it needed the disembodied legacy of Albert Lasker, a targeted, directed strategy borrowed from the world of business and advertising. Farber's life also collided with cancer, a collision that he had perhaps presaged for a decade. In the late 1940s, he had developed a mysterious and chronic inflammatory disease of the intestines, likely ulcerative colitis, a debilitating precancerous illness that predisposes the colon and bile duct to cancer. In the mid-1950s, we do not know the precise date, Farber underwent surgery to remove his inflamed colon at Mount Auburn Hospital in Boston, likely choosing the small and private Cambridge Hospital across the Charles River to keep his diagnosis and surgery hidden from his colleagues and friends on the Longwood campus. It is also likely that more than just precancer was discovered upon surgery, for in later years, Mary Lasker would refer to Farber as a cancer survivor, without ever divulging the nature of his cancer. Proud, guarded, and secretive, reluctant to conflate his battle against cancer with the battle, Farber also pointedly refused to discuss his personal case publicly. Thomas Farber, his son, would also not discuss it. I will neither confirm nor deny it," he said, although he admitted that his father lived in the shadow of illness in his last years, an ambiguity that I choose to respect. The only remnant of the colon surgery was a colostomy bag. Farber hid it expertly under his white cuffed shirt and his four-button suit during his hospital rounds. Although cloaked in secrecy and discretion, Farber's personal confrontation with cancer also fundamentally altered the tone and urgency of his campaign. As with Lasker, cancer was no longer an abstraction for him. He had sensed its shadow flitting darkly over himself. "It is not necessary," he wrote, "in order to make great progress in the cure of cancer, for us to have the full solution of all the problems of basic research. The history of medicine is replete with examples of cures obtained years, decades, and even centuries before the mechanism of action was understood for those cures. Patients with cancer who are going to die this year cannot wait," Farber insisted. Neither could he nor Mary Lasker. And that's a break. We have 10 pages left. Mary Lasker knew that the stakes of this effort were enormous. The Laskerites' proposed strategy for cancer ran directly against the grain of the dominant model for biomedical research in the 1950s. The chief architect of the prevailing model was a tall, gaunt, MIT-trained engineer named Vannevar Bush, who had served as the director of the Office of Scientific Research and Development, or OSRD. Created in 1941, the OSRD had played a crucial role during the war years, in large part by channeling American scientific ingenuity towards the invention of novel military technologies for the war. To achieve this, the agency had recruited scientists performing basic research in the projects that emphasized programmatic research. Basic research, diffuse and open-ended inquiry in fundamental questions, was a luxury of peacetime. The war demanded something more urgent and goal-directed. New weapons needed to be manufactured, and new technologies invented to aid soldiers in the battlefield. This was a battle progressively suffused with military technology, A wizard's war, as newspapers called it, and a cadre of scientific wizards was needed to help America win it. The wizards had wrought astonishing technological magic. Physicists had created sonar, radar, the sum of double bonds and rings. I'm kidding. Had created sonar, radar, radio sensing bombs, and amphibious tanks. Chemists had produced intensely efficient and lethal chemical weapons, including the infamous war gases. Biologists had studied the effects of high-altitude survival and seawater ingestion. Even mathematicians, the archbishops of the arcane, had been packed off to crack secret codes for the military. The undisputed crown jewel of this targeted effort, of course, was the atomic bomb, the product of the OSRD-led Manhattan Project. On August 7, 1945, the morning after the Hiroshima bombing, the New York Times gushed about the extraordinary success of the project. University professors who are opposed to organizing, planning, and directing research about the manner of industrial University professors who are opposed to organizing, planning, and directing research after the manner of industrial laboratories have something to think about now. The most important piece of research was conducted on behalf of the Army in precisely the means adopted in the industrial laboratories. End result, an invention was given to the world in 3 years, which it would have taken perhaps half a century to develop if we had to rely on prima donna research scientists who work alone. A problem was stated. It was solved by teamwork, by planning, by competent direction, and not by the mere desire to satisfy curiosity. The congratulatory tone of the editorial captured a general sentiment about science that had swept across the nation. The Manhattan Project had overturned the prevailing model of scientific discovery. The bomb had been designed, as the Times scoffingly put it, not by tweedy prima donna university professors wandering about in search of obscure truths that are driven by the mere desire to satisfy curiosity, but by a focused SWAT team of researchers sent off to accomplish a concrete mission. A new model of scientific governance emerged from the project. Research driven by specific mandates, timelines, and goals. Frontal attack science, to use one scientist's description, which had produced the remarkable technological boom during the war. But Vannevar Bush was not convinced. In a deeply influential report to President Truman entitled Science, the Endless Frontier, first published in 1945, Bush laid out a view of post-war research that had turned his own model of wartime research on its head. Basic research, Bush wrote, is performed without thought of practical ends. It results in general knowledge and an understanding of nature and its laws. This general knowledge provides the means of answering a large number of important practical problems, though it may not give a specific, complete answer to any one of them. Basic research leads to new knowledge. It provides scientific capital. It creates the funds from which the practical applications of knowledge must be drawn. Basic research is the pacemaker of technological progress. In the 19th century, Yankee mechanical ingenuity, building largely upon the basic discoveries of European scientists, could greatly advance the technical arts. Now the situation is difficult. Now the situation is different. A nation which depends upon others for its new basic scientific knowledge will be slow in its industrial progress and weak in its competitive position in world trade, regardless of its mechanical skill. Directed, targeted research, programmatic science, the cause célèbre during the war years, Bush argued, was not a sustainable model for the future of American science. As Bush perceived it, even the widely lauded Manhattan Project epitomized the virtues of basic inquiry. True, the bomb was the product of Yankee mechanical ingenuity, but that mechanical ingenuity stood on the shoulders of scientific discoveries about the fundamental nature of the atom and the energy locked inside it. Research performed, notably, with no driving mandate to produce anything resembling the atomic bomb. While the bomb might have come to life physically in Los Alamos, intellectually speaking, it was the product of pre-war physics and chemistry rooted deeply in Europe. The iconic homegrown product of wartime American science was, at least philosophically speaking, an import. And lesson Bush had learned from all this was that goal-directed strategies, still useful in wartime, would be of limited use during periods of peace. Frontal attacks were useful on the war front, but post-war science could not be produced by fiat. So Bush had pushed for a radically inverted model of scientific development in which researchers were allowed full autonomy over their explorations and open-ended inquiry was prioritized. The plan had a deep and lasting influence on Washington. The National Science Foundation, NSF, founded in 1950, was explicitly created to encourage scientific autonomy, turning in time, as one historian put it, into a veritable embodiment of Bush's grand design for reconciling government money and scientific independence. A new culture of research, long-term basic scientific research rather than sharply focused quests for treatment and disease prevention, rapidly proliferated at the NSF and subsequently at the NIH. This is a break, but I'll keep going, because we gotta go for it, man. For the Laskerites, this augured a profound conflict. A war on cancer, they felt, demanded precisely the sort of focus and undiluted commitment that had been achieved so efficiently at Los Alamos. World War II had clearly surcharged medical research with new problems and new solutions. It had prompted the development of novel resuscitation techniques, research on blood and frozen plasma, and on the role of adrenal steroids in shock, and on cerebral and cardiac blood flow. Never in the history of medicine, as A.N. Richards, the chairman of the Committee of Medical Research, put it, had there been so great a coordination of medical science labor. This sense of common purpose and coordination galvanized the Laskerites. They wanted a Manhattan Project for cancer. Increasingly, they felt that it was no longer necessary to wait for fundamental questions about cancer to be solved before launching an all-out attack on the problem. Farber, after all, had forced his way through the early leukemia trials with scarcely any foreknowledge about how aminopterin worked, even in normal cells, let alone cancer cells. Oliver Heaviside, an English mathematician from the 1920s, once wrote jokingly about a scientist musing at a dinner table. Should I refuse my dinner because I don't understand the digestive system? To Heaviside's question, Farber might have added his own. Should I refuse to attack cancer because I have not solved its basic cellular mechanisms? Other scientists echoed this frustration. The outspoken Philadelphia pathologist Stanley Riemann wrote, "Workers in cancer must make every effort to organize their work with goals in view, not just because they are interesting, but because they will help in the solution of the cancer problem." Bush's cult of open-ended, curiosity-driven inquiry, interesting science, had ossified into dogma. To battle cancer, that dogma needed to be overturned. The first and most seminal step in the direction was the creation of a focused drug discovery unit for anti-cancer drugs. In 1954, after a furious bout of political lobbying by Laskerites, the Senate authorized the NCI to build a program to find chemotherapeutic drugs in a more directed, targeted manner. By 1955, this effort, called the Cancer Chemotherapy National Service Center, or CCNSC, was in full swing. Between 1954 and 1964, this unit would test 82,700 synthetic chemicals, 115,000 fermentation products, and 70,200 plant derivatives, and treat nearly 1 million mice every year with various chemicals to find an ideal drug. Mice. Farber was ecstatic but impatient. The enthusiasm of these new friends of chemotherapy is refreshing and seems to be on a genuine foundation, he wrote to Lasker in 1955. It nevertheless seems frightfully slow. It sometimes becomes monotonous to see more and more men brought into the program go through the joys of discovering America. Let's go. There's a break here, but we will go for it, man. Farber had, meanwhile, stepped up his own drug delivery efforts in Boston. In the 1940s, the soil microbiologist Selman Waskman had systematically scoured the world of soil bacteria and purified a diverse series of antibiotics, like the penicillium mold, which produces penicillin. Like the penicillium mold, which produces penicillin, bacteria also produces antibiotics to wage chemical warfare on other microbes. One such antibiotic came from a rod-shaped microbe called Actinomyces. Waskman called it actinomycin D. actinomycin D, an enormous molecule shaped like an ancient Greek statue, with a small headless torso and 2 extended wings. Actinomycin D was later found to work by binding and damaging DNA. It potently killed bacterial cells, but unfortunately it also killed human cells, limiting its use as an antibacterial agent. But a cellular poison could always excite an oncologist. In the summer of 1954, Farber persuaded Waksman to send him a number of antibiotics, including actinomycin D, to repurpose them as anti-tumor agents by testing the drugs on a series of mouse tumors. Actinomycin D, Farber found, was remarkably effective in mice. Just a few doses melted away many mouse cancers, including leukemias, lymphomas, and breast cancers. One hesitates to call them cures, Farber wrote expectantly, but it is hard to classify them otherwise. Energized by the animal cures, in 1955, he launched a series of trials to evaluate the efficiency of drugs in humans. Actinomycin D had no effect on leukemias in children. Undeterred, Farber unleashed the drug on 275 children with a diverse range of cancers: lymphomas, kidney sarcomas, muscle sarcomas, and neuroblastic tumors. The trial was a pharmacist's nightmare. Actinomycin D was so toxic that it had to be heavily diluted in saline. If even minute amounts leaked out of the veins, then the skin around the leak would necrose and turn black. In children with small veins, the drug was often given through an intravenous line inserted in the scalp. The one form of cancer that responded in these early trials was Wilms tumor, a rare variant of kidney cancer. Once detected in very young children, Wilms tumor was typically treated by surgical removal of the affected kidney. Surgical removal was followed by X-ray radiation to the affected kidney bed. But not all of Wilms cases could be treated using local therapy. In a fraction of cases, by the time the tumor was detected, it had already metastasized, usually to the lungs. Recalcitrant to treatment there, Wilms tumors were usually bombarded with X-rays and assorted drugs, but with little hopes of a sustained response. Farber found that actinomycin D, administered intravenously, potently inhibited the growth of these lung metastases, often producing remissions that lasted months. Intrigued, he pressed further. If X-rays and actinomycin D could both attack Wilms metastases independently, what if the agents could be combined? In 1958, he sent a young radiologist couple named Giulio D'Angio and Audrey Evans and an oncologist named Donald Pinkel to work on the project. Within months, the team had confirmed that X-rays and actinomycin D were remarkably synergistic, each multiplying the toxic effect of the other. Children with metastatic cancer treated with the combined regimen often responded briskly. In about 3 weeks, lungs previously riddled with Wilms tumor metastasis cleared completely, D'Angio recalled. Imagine the excitement of these days when one could say for the first time with justifiable confidence, we can fix that. The enthusiasm generated by these findings was infectious. Although combination X-ray and chemotherapy did not always produce long-term cures, Wilms tumor was the first metastatic solid tumor to respond to chemotherapy. Farber had achieved his long-sought leap from the world of liquid cancers to solid tumors. And we've got 4 pages left. 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 3 breaks, and we're at one of them right now. We got another match in the puzzle. That's always great. You know, curing cancer is like solving puzzles. And putting, dog turds into an elixir. I just gotta rest my... Oh. No, that's not it. I just gotta rest my mouth, man, because... Oh, man, like halfway into the passage, it started hurting. You know, like when in the morning when you get up and you like swallow some mucus and all of a sudden you feel this sting in your throat. Yeah, that's how my throat suddenly felt. It's like I'd woken up and swallowed and felt the pain, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, this day's fucked, man. This is gonna be a bad day. Man, I just got like, well, I only got like 2 matches. Well, 3 matches. I got 3 matches, man. Isn't this great? Okay, let's keep going. Just gotta crack my neck. By the late 1950s, Farber was bristling with a fiery brand of optimism. Yet visitors to the Jimmy Fund Clinic in the mid-1950s might have witnessed a more nuanced and complex reality. For Sonia Goldstein, whose 2-year-old son, David, was treated with chemotherapy for Wilms tumor in 1956, the clinic seemed perpetually suspended between 2 poles, both wonderful and tragic, unspeakably depressing and indescribably hopeful. On entering the cancer ward, Goldstein would write later, I sense an undercurrent of excitement, a feeling persistent despite repeated frustrations of being on the verge of discovery, which makes me almost hopeful. We enter a large hall decorated with a cardboard train along one wall. Halfway down the ward is an authentic-looking stop sign, which can flash green, red, and amber lights. The train's engine can be climbed into and the bell pulled. At the other end of the ward is a life-size gasoline pump, registering amount sold and price. My first impression is one of overweening activity, almost snake pit-like in its intensity. It was a snake pit, only of cancer, a seething, immersed box coiled with illness, hope, and desperation. A girl named Jenny, about 4 years old, played with a new set of crayons in a corner. Her mother, an attractive, easily excitable woman, kept Jenny in constant sight, holding her child with the claw-like intensity of her gaze, as Jenny stooped to pick up the colors. No activity was innocent here. Anything might be a sign, a symptom, a portent. Jenny, Goldstein realized, has leukemia, and is currently in the hospital because she developed jaundice. Her eyeballs are still yellow, presaging fulminant liver failure. She, like many of the ward's inhabitants, was relatively oblivious to the meaning of her illness. Jenny's own concern was an aluminum tea kettle to which she was deeply attached. Sitting in go-kart in the hall is a little girl who I think, at first, has been given a black eye. Lucy, a 2-year-old, suffers from a form of cancer that spreads to the area behind the eye and causes hemorrhaging there. She is not an attractive child, and wails almost incessantly that first day. So does Debbie, an angelic-looking 4-year-old whose face is white and frowning with suffering. She has the same type of tumor as Lucy, a neuroblastoma. Alone in a room lies Teddy. It takes many days before I venture inside it, for a skeleton thin and blinded, Teddy has a monstrosity of a face. His tumor, starting behind the ear, has engulfed one side of his head and obliterated his normal features. He is fed through a tube in the nostril and is fully conscious. Throughout the ward were little inventions and improvisations, often devised by Farber himself. Since the children were usually too exhausted to walk, tiny wooden go-karts were scattered about the room so the patients could move around with relative freedom. IV poles for chemotherapy were strung up to the carts to allow chemo to be given at all times during the day. To me, Goldstein wrote, one of the most pathetic sights of all that I have seen is the little go-kart, with a little child, leg or arm tightly bandaged to hold needle in vein, and a tall IV pole with its burette. The combined effect is that of a boat with mast but no sail, hopelessly drifting alone in a rough, uncharted sea. And that comes to another break, 2:03. It's so cold here. Man. I was moving my hand to do some more puzzle, and I could feel it sluggish. I could feel it was sluggish, man. Like it was as if time had slowed down, but I was still trying to. It was like time had slowed down, but like I had not like realized that. So I was like, it was like I was currently freezing up, like I was entrapped in the refrigerator or the freezer, and I was trying to move my arm, but it was moving like half the speed, man. There was something so surreal about that. Anyways, I just made a few matches. I should probably stop so that my progress can be aptly documented in a future vlog. Okay. Let's keep going, shall we? So I just had to get that out there. Ooh, that just moved something inside my body. That did not feel good. Whatever. Every evening, Farber came to the wards, forcefully driving his own sailless boat through this rough and uncharted sea. He paused at each bed, taking notes and discussing the case, often barking out characteristically brusque instructions. A retinue followed him: medical residents, nurses, social wards, psychiatrists, nutritionists, and pharmacists. Cancer, he insisted, was a total disease, an illness that gripped patients not just physically, but psychically, socially, and emotionally. Only a multi-pronged, multidisciplinary attack would stand any chance of battling this disease. He got the concept total care. But despite all attempts at providing total care, death stalked the wards relentlessly. In the winter of 1956, a few years after David's visits, a volley of deaths hit Farber's clinic. Betty, a child with leukemia, was the first to die. Then it was Jenny, the 4-year-old with the aluminum tea kettle. Teddy, with rectoblastoma, was next. A week later, Axel, another child with leukemia, bled to death, with hemorrhages in his mouth. Goldstein observed, death assumes shape, form, and routine. Parents emerge from the child's room, as they have perhaps done periodically for days, for short rests. A nurse takes them to the doctor's small office. The doctor comes in and shuts the door behind him. Later, a nurse brings coffee. Still later, she hands the patients a large brown paper bag containing odds and ends of belongings. A few minutes later, back at our promenade, we note another empty bed. Finish. In the winter of 1956, after a prolonged and bruising battle, Sonia's son, 3-year-old David Goldstein, died of metastatic Wilms tumor at the Jimmy Fund Clinic, having spent the last few hours of his life delirious and whimpering under an oxygen mask. Sonia Goldstein left the hospital carrying her own brown paper bag containing the remains of her child. But Farber was unfazed. The arsenal of cancer chemotherapy, having been empty for centuries, had filled up with new drugs. The possibilities thrown open by these discoveries were enormous. Permutations and combinations of medicines, variations in doses and schedules, trials containing 2, 3, and 4 drug regimens. There was, at least in principle, the capacity to retreat cancer with one drug if another had failed, or to try one combination followed by another. This, Farber kept telling himself with hypnotic conviction, was not the finish. This was just the beginning of an all-out attack. And that's the last break. In her hospital bed on the 14th floor, Carla Reed was still in isolation, trapped in a cool, sterile room where even the molecules of air arrived filtered through dozens of sieves. The smell of antiseptic soap pervaded her clothes. A television occasionally flickered on and off. Food came in on a tray labeled with brave, optimistic names: chunky potato salad or chicken Kiev. But everything tasted as if it had been boiled and seared almost to obliteration. It had been. The food had to be sterilized before it could enter the room. Carla's husband, a computer engineer, came in every afternoon to sit by her bed. Ginny, her mother, spent the days rocking mechanically in a chair, exactly as I had found her the first morning. When Carla's children stopped by in masks and gloves, she wept quietly, turning her face towards the window. Oh right, this is the author himself, Siddhartha. That's his story. So we're transitioning. This is not Farber stuff anymore. This is, well, technically, progress and stuff. But what for Farber, for for Carla, the physical isolation of these days became a barely concealed metaphor for a much deeper, fiercer loneliness, a psychological quarantine even more achingly painful than her actual confinement. In those first 2 weeks, I withdrew into a different person, she said. What went through the room and what came out were two different people. I thought over and over again about my chances of surviving through all this. 30%. I would repeat that number to myself at night. Not even a third. I would stay up at night looking up at the ceiling and think, what is 30%? What happens 30% at a time? I am 30 years old, about 30% of 90. If someone gave me 30% odds in a game, would I take the odds? Just 30% of 100. Just say 30% of 100. Oh, who cares? I'm kidding. The morning after Carla had arrived at the hospital, I walked into her room with sheaves of paper. They were consent forms for chemotherapy that would allow us to instantly start pumping poisons into her body to kill cancer cells. No, it doesn't work anymore. Whatever, just put it there. Okay. Sorry. Just had to get it out there. Had to, no other way. Chemotherapy would come in 3 phases. The first phase would last about a month. The drugs, given in rapid-fire succession, would hopefully send the leukemia into a sustained remission. They would certainly kill her normal white blood cells as well. Her white cell count would drop in free fall all the way to 0. For a few critical days, she would inhabit one of the most vulnerable states that modern medicine can produce, a body with no immune system, defenseless against the environment around it. If the leukemia did go into remission, then we would consolidate and intensify the remission over several months. That would mean more chemotherapy, but at lower doses, given over longer intervals. She would be able to leave the hospital and return home, coming back every week for more chemotherapy. Consolidation and intensification would last for 8 additional weeks, perhaps longer. The worst part, perhaps, I kept for last. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia has an ugly propensity for hiding in the brain. The intravenous chemotherapy that we would give Carla, no matter how potent, simply couldn't break into the cisterns and ventricles that bathe her brain. The blood-brain barrier essentially made the brain into a sanctuary, an unfortunate word implying that your own body could be abetting the cancer for the leukemia cells. To send drugs directly into that sanctuary, the medicines would need to be injected directly into Carla's spinal fluid through a series of spinal taps. Whole brain radiation treatment, highly penetrant X-ray doses directly through her skull, would also be used prophylactically against leukemia growth in her brain. And there would be even more chemotherapy to follow, spanning over 2 years, to maintain the remission if we achieved it. Induction, intensification, maintenance, cure, and arrow and pencil connecting the 4 points on a blank piece of paper. Carla nodded. When I went through the avalanche of chemotherapy drugs that would be used over the next 2 years to treat her, she repeated the names softly after me under her breath, like a child discovering a new tongue twister. Cyclophosphamide, cytarabine, prednisone, asparaginase, adriamycin, thioguanine. Isn't that like stuff in DNA? Guanine? Never mind. Vincristine, 6-mercaptopurine, methotrexate. And that's the end of this chapter. And I think I will go back upstairs and do some actual work. So this will end the blog for today. And my mouth is so fucked up. Okay, let's just end this and get on with our lives, shall we?